Yeah. Oh, so now you're
Yes.
recording. Okay.
Okay,
All right. Well, that works.
good.
We'll figure out where the video is afterwards.
Yeah,
Maybe I got it and maybe you got it.
right. If
So-
I get it, I'll send it to you.
Okay. All right. So, anyone want to start in terms of issues or thoughts or concerns? Or I feel funny not being able to manipulate the model. It's weird.
Okay. One question I'd like to ask the group is, are people getting benefit out of the systems mapping itself? Not out of the conversations and all the references and all the information we've been giving, but are they getting benefit out of the systems mapping, either understanding it or seeing how it can help with understanding? Is it helping people with their thinking to have a map like this?
I think it is very helpful, even if it very much depends on how much time you have dedicated to studying the map. But in the straight answer to your question, yes, I think it is useful.
Having looked at a few IT flow charts, this isn't really too bad. Yeah, if we started over, it would be simpler. But as I delved into 16R, I started to understand this thing a lot better.
Yeah, from my perspective, I was telling Gene that this is my first time to really join this and see the process. And it is really very helpful for me to see how we all collaborate and get this process going. So hopefully I'll be able to see the end product of this. And thank you to everyone. I appreciate all the insights.
Good.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It forces me, it forces my my thinking into a channel, because I have to look for the next connection. It creates a structure that is very helpful.
Thanks, everybody.
I actually found it, as we worked with this, I realized that there were actually better ways to walk through it and ferret out the pieces after they're there that I never realized before we worked on this particular project. In terms of starting one place and doing a focus, and then slowly expanding the focus, as opposed to trying to look at all of it and think about pieces of it while I'm looking at all of it, because I continue to find it overwhelming. So I have to pick, like John said about 16R. Okay, so he started with 16R, and you can focus that, and you can think about the relationships, and then you can think about or look at the additional things that are connected to the elements that are in 16R, so that you begin to understand the context for 16R. And it just, I had not realized that before this particular project. I have fewer headaches now than I used to have.
Good.
Other than the headaches of trying to keep up with all of the posts that Brian and Klaus are making, which are good posts. It's just hard to keep up with. And that last video that you posted that I watched this morning was really good. I don't remember where it was, but it was really good.
But the thought comes to my mind, based on your last comment, Gene, is that none of us should be expected to try to keep up with everything, because the more I get into it, the greater or the more extended the information seems to be. It seems like you're never going to catch up. So you would have to depend upon a group of people kind of collaborative working together, where no one person has to do it all, but everybody's kind of like both putting stuff in and figuring out how to integrate it into a systemic form within the system.
Okay. Do you want to,
Agreed.
John, you want to talk about 16R? We don't need to be compete. Brian, you can go ahead and run this, and I'll sort of participate. How's that? Is that okay?
Well, okay. I mean, well, let's go back to, okay, John, do you mind talking about 16R?
No, not at all.
Good. Because, I'm not quite sure where to take this, but yeah, that means that's. I'd like to hear from you guys and see what it is that we have a slightly better handle on the systems mapping portion of it. How do we use that to help you guys with your more content-based knowledge or the other things you bring to this effort? So, you know, working together. So, John, what about 16R?
Well, it has changed shape since I last looked at it, and it's germane to local food. However, when I last looked at it, it was more of a drooping full stomach, and now it's maybe a vegan diet.
Okay, let me stop. I'm sorry, guys. Let me stop for just a second. I'm going to change from the introduction map over to the relevant factors map, and maybe that's the one that John's talking about. But the shape of it doesn't make any difference, okay?
Yeah.
It's the element connections that make the difference. So,
Sure.
right, bring this up and go there. There's. Is that any difference? I may have changed it. I may have changed it.
That's the same one.
Okay.
Retailers willing to source local have the potential of increasing local consumption. It is a, let's see, it's a reinforcing growth. Local consumption in aggregate provides the market through local sustainable food. And I thought that somehow if there could be a teamed up with a reinforcing, what was it? Virtuous
Right.
loop, so that people who maybe brought their product to market once a year could look beyond that self-interested timeline to other methods of increasing production.
Right. Right. So, well, what I'm hearing, that's kind of like our next step when we get to the point where we're saying, okay, this is what we need to do. Where can we find the leverage points in this system? That's one of the potential ones that we have. It sounds to me like it's going to involve public awareness, education, shifting the values of the system and all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, once everybody's happy with this map, I think that's one of those things we can look at.
One of the things that occurred to me is the concept of a market maker in commodities or stock market.
Right.
But on a local basis, maybe they don't have monetary incentives to be that market maker.
Right.
Somebody has to provide some sort of a vision.
Right.
Market maker.
Yeah.
And this map helped me bring some things to memory this morning, and I wrote them up. I wouldn't know where to put them on the map right now, but
why don't you put them in the issues?
I will.
Okay,
I will.
Great. Yeah, I think if people can put things in the issues, it's easier because that's where everybody kind of our common watering hole.
Right. I'll summarize what I have to put in there. If you see a video, well, there's a movie out about the Oklahoma land rush, 1889, and you show people from the Midwest, different soils, different amounts of rainfall, with moldboard plows on their wagon. They're ready to plow, and they make that claim. Well, that was a dust bowl waiting to happen.
Right.
wrong. It's just wrong.
Mhm.
So local methods come up with local food supply has to come up with different methods. It's a whole new ball game for everybody.
Exactly.
So if I may interject here, it's a whole new ball game for us in the United States. It's not anything new for cultures that have lived for thousands of years on the same land. You know, when you look at Japan, Italy, Lebanon, you know, they have all sustained themselves and not destroyed their soil in the process because their cuisines are balanced with what the farmer can provide in a sustainable fashion.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. I opened, we got 31, unless somebody else has something else they want to add or bring up, you know, how about we choose one of these issues we've been dealing with and seeing if we can go through them and try to come up with some ideas. Is there any issues that we have outstanding that people say, hey, you know, I'm confused about this, or, you know, I want to have something to say about this? I can close all these up then.
Close what? All of those on the right?
Yeah.
That might be a rash assumption.
Yes, I think so too. I would hope so. All right.
I need more time to go through the comments issues. I haven't had the time last week. I had to close an important contract.
Oh yeah.
So
No, I'm retired, and this is my thing. So let me find one that Gene and I were talking about just a little while ago. Okay. All right. I'm going to change over to another map and just ask you guys about this.
Well, suppose you explain to people why you have different maps.
Okay. Well,
Explain to me why you have different maps.
Okay, the reason why I have different maps is because, one, I don't want to mess up your map, which is the most important thing.
It's not my map.
Well, I don't want
Okay, go ahead.
I don't want to mess up the map. If I start trying out some crazy idea, I don't want to mess it up. Two, starting with the fresh map, let me start with fresh thinking. And a lot of times what I'm working at it's only tangentially related to the original map. I mean, like this one I'm showing you here, this is community size and farm production. One of the issue threads we had with the main map, Klaus was talking about how did we determine the size of a rural community? And I started thinking about that and seeing what different aspects were. So I came up with this map. And I'll take you through it slowly. So basically, and this came from a map that Gene did. I got the idea from him. I steal a lot of ideas from Gene.
Recycling is a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. Cloning, recycling, anything you want to call it. So the assumptions are these, and I'll go step by step, that birth and immigration add to a population. That's a general assumption. Then the assumption is that population put into a set geographic space, when you increase it over time, it increases density, okay? And you put those two things together, to my mind, it explains urbanization. So urbanization is just a process where you have continually, you're putting people into a city, or whatever it happens to be, and you're putting them in closer proximity, greater density, and that creates a lot of different aspects, including a scaling. Cities happen to scale superlinearly in a lot of different aspects. And that's why people like Jeffrey West are looking at that as why cities are one of the most viable solutions to world problems. But here's the thing. All of this urbanization is going to take away from sustainable farmland. All right? So I'm going to go through, I'm going to go with the reinforcing loops. My first assumption is that rural communities maintain sustainable farms. Sustainable farms help to create sustainable farm production, organic, regenerative, whatever you want to call it. And that helps to sustain rural communities. That also helps sustain a local market, okay?
Okay.
Find all these. Might as well take it off. Hold on. Let me do it this way. I'm going to close this up too. There's so many things on here now. How do I get myself out of here? Oh, bloody hell.
It's a B3 rather than an R3.
That's a B3, exactly. All right. I'll just find B3. Oops, I did that wrong too. I am not doing good here, folks.
It's there it is.
All right. I'm making the assumption that because of the greater distance between urban markets and local farms, that adds on greater costs to those small farmers. But that large farm businesses, probably in the wrong order here, are better able to compete against small farms because of that. But not only that, I got one more. Let me just open this up again. They also result in taking away from sustainable farming. The overall effect is that this starts to result in a reduction in rural communities who immigrate to the cities and start to exacerbate the problem. I probably should have used this here. Community.
Which shows why it's much better to work through that set of thoughts here on a separate map. Some of the elements are the same as ones on the other map.
Yes.
And some of them are not on the other map, I think.
Exactly.
Probably. And you get to sort of think it out and use the ones that are already on the other map if they go here, and you don't have to recreate them from scratch.
Right.
Whatever definition they have, you bring with it when you use that element in this particular map. So that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Now, I don't have it in this issue thing, but somewhere I put it, this is basically a successful archetype.
Okay.
And it's one of the deep reasons why making changes to the system we're working, which is so difficult, because the system that we're going against is so entrenched. You know, it just has such momentum, and it's very hard to stop that momentum, and it's extremely resilient. This is the corporate conventional farming system is an exceedingly resilient system, and we need to figure out where the best leverage points are for going against it.
So if I may interject some thoughts here. One is that we need to differentiate by type of crop.
Right.
You know, for example, vine, is one crop that is clearly benefiting from some form of concentration. Produce is clearly best off coming from local, but grain, for example, wheat is growing better in certain regions than in others. So I think if we go back to the paradigm level and say that anything grown should be grown in a regenerative, sustainable manner,
Right.
regenerative, organic manner.
Right.
You know, then we have a core criteria that drives the decision-making process of what gets grown where.
Right.
And then by default, there will be surplus in some areas because they're more conducive to certain crops than others. And then that surplus needs to be shared. And that system, when you go to the European Union, for example, or you go into the Middle East, or you go to Asia, that system has evolved over thousands of years and is quite successful.
Mm-hmm.
What has happened in the United States with their industrialization of agriculture is that they're using chemicals, you know, to overpower nature,
Mm-hmm.
and co-crops in areas where they don't belong and where they can't function naturally, and where they are attacked by predatory forces like pesticides, and I mean like weeds and insects, and so they need to defend these crops with more chemicals to function.
Right.
So the overarching criteria should be whatever it is you grow, it has to be grown in healthy soil, and you have to maintain the health of soil. So if that is the case, then it makes sense, and it's okay to create a surplus that is being distributed out of the region.
Right, right. One of the things I was wondering when I was doing this model was part of the Green Revolution brought about because of urbanization forcing this type of farming commodification system, and that once it was successful, we started to then export it to other parts of the world, taking advantage. So, but when we mentioned corn, those thought came to my mind too. We could also use corn for biofuel. So it's going to be interesting when we do it to map out what the actual implications and the possible unintended consequences are from any action we take. So that's something I'm thinking about now.
Could I speak to urbanization as a possible leverage point?
Sure.
In the mid-'80s, the Chicago, Illinois area comprised 6 counties, and now it is 8. And the extra 2 were farmland. Now, back in, let's say 1900, urbanization's going on, and farming is getting more industrial. And a wheat farmer sent his crop somewhere to be milled because he couldn't preserve it and get it to an urban market. And in the process, fiber and wheat germ and things like that did not get delivered to the urban consumer. Now, we're talking about the possibility of the Internet of Things, the 4th Industrial Revolution. Yikes. I'm going to suggest that the way to stand and put the hand out to this freight train of history is to capture the value closer to the consumer. That incents the farmer and the local producer, and then it's easier to transport a processed product, processed however much, to an urban environment than to transport through a daily commute an individual to a highly urbanized job. A 2-hour commute across Chicagoland, for example, is very, very destructive of all kinds of things. So I suggest that the average farmer is a tinkerer kind of an individual. That is someone who could come up with the local technologies that enable a local market.
John, you should try mapping that out. I mean, just make some rough sketches.
Okay. Okay, I'll do that.
So, okay, another thought that just came to mind when you guys were talking, and that is we need to keep in mind that the system we come up with has got to be able to feed the burgeoning urban populations out there. So we got to both make sure that we're no longer destroying the environment, and through regenerative farming, that's the best way of doing it. We also have to produce enough to feed everybody that was fed before, or more, actually, because population is growing. And third, one of the thoughts that came to my mind is the transition problem is, from reading, my understanding is that only about 1% of farmland in America could be what we would call sustainable, either organic or regenerative. And regenerative is a much smaller percentage of organic. So there's not, so right now, a lot of farm that's being set. Most of it is being done conventionally. And those organic farmers that are working right now, they're doing it because they can charge a higher price. It's a higher economic value. When we implement the system we're envisioning now, how do we affect those farmers? Do those farmers all of a sudden find themselves being economically harmed because of what we're doing? And the other, and I don't know the answer to this, is there a greater cost to regenerative farming than there is to organic farming? Because already organic farming has a premium over conventional, which is why conventional has such a strong competition position against it, or competitive position against it.
So regenerative farming is actually more cost effective, but it has to go through a transition period to get there.
Okay.
Now, so it takes about 3 to 5 years to convert farmland into sustainable. So we have to go through a regenerating process, which takes investment and time. And during that time, typically yields are declining.
Right.
So you're dealing with less yield and more input cost for a transition period. So as you already mentioned here, the issue really is in the middle. It is in the low end of the market. You have to get into the mass market to really make an impact, right? So. And I was pointing that out before, how the mass market is actually innovating, investing billions of dollars in trying to perpetuate its existing business model instead of assisting the farmer to shift into this regenerative organic process. The reason is that their business model is based on a burger patty and on hamburger meat. You have McDonald's with 34,000 restaurants, all the same kitchen equipment that depends on getting a frozen patty from wherever, with a 2-year shelf life and in frozen condition, being put on a grill that is customized to steam it up and serve it on a bun. So for these groups to change into a different process, accept different ingredients for their menu is a massive undertaking that goes through the entire supply chain into the retail unit. Huge investments that may still not make it. I mean, they still may not be able to turn that corner. So they're resisting that change. But we have to get into the mass market. So, I mean, I come back to that. Whatever change can flow through the system has to start at the paradigm level. There has to be a general agreement that we have to shift into a regenerative organic process,
right.
And then figure out what that really means. for the system to reorganize itself.
One of the problems, though, is that when people look at a system, they oftentimes cannot see beyond maybe one or two causal steps. They can see those things that are immediately affecting them, but anything beyond that, they have a hard time. One of the things I did was I focused on only a few of the loops in the model for looking at community size, rural community size. And if you look at this, from the point of view of somebody in the rural community, this seems to be what's happening. He's trying to sell in a market. He's finding it's harder and harder to compete. And he notices all his neighbors are leaving, but he doesn't really understand it's because of the way the system is set up and that the larger corporate farms are taking away, or maybe he does realize this, but he just doesn't know any way of handling it. Your thing about the transition in terms of regenerative farming and the upfront cost associated sounds really interesting to me, but I wouldn't know how to map that. I mean, I got an idea of what you're talking about, but somebody else with more expertise would have to map it out for me. And then I could say, okay, this is how this fits together, and this is the pathway we possibly could take. Could you possibly map something out?
Well, you know, I'm completely out of bandwidth to learn how to do this.
Oh, okay. Well,
but here is where I'm coming back to saying that the system, in order to reorganize and restructure itself, will have to be addressed at the paradigm level. And so then we come back to systems value system. You know, so what is this value system dictating needs to happen at the execution level.
Right.
You know, throughout the various levels and the moving down the hierarchy of the system, as it, and I'm referring back to Donna Meadows, you know, her steps of hierarchy, how to with the leverage points of a system. They're clearly at the paradigm level here. So, because, for example, I posted earlier, there are initiatives, for example, to double the value of food stamps, provided they are being redeemed for very specific products. Mm-hmm. And those products then can be local produce, local regeneratively grown products. So the low end of the market is equipped with purchasing power to support that. That brings in the next complication. Many of these people don't know how to cook. They don't have kitchen equipment that can really use this. So now you need the retail sector to come in and provide consumable meals, meal kits, things of that sort. So the entire system has to engage here to make that work. But my thing really is focusing at the systems, value system, paradigm level, and lay out a relatively short list of imperatives. Now, one of them being we need to regenerate the soil and put soil organic matter back into the ground. Then let the system from there drive itself and lay in a map of incentives to get there. Now, it's because as we get too specific in mapping this particular system, we may be tempted to drive towards solutions that are less than perfect. You know, we may miss things, we may not understand things, we have limited information. Right. But if we lay in incentives instead, you know, that encourage, for example, reward a farmer. So one core incentive that has been widely debated is to pay the farmer on a per ton basis of burying carbon into the ground. You know, there is NORI and ORI, a new upstart that will go live next year. Yeah. which is a carbon trading market
Right.
that pays farmers for burning, and they're using Bitcoin. I mean, they're using a blockchain technology with an associated cryptocurrency to reward, to pay the farmer,
Right.
and to create a lay-in system. So I would move more into that direction rather than trying to map with great specificity what needs to happen.
Well, you're not going to map with any great specificity. I mean, that's just not possible. We're not at any close to that level. But so what you're talking about is working with the system value system. If I get the thing moved right. And basically looking at, how, if I understand right, how to help the system self-organize under a new set of values, a new paradigm involving regenerative farming, so that flows through the entire system.
Yes.
Did I get that right? Okay.
Yes.
So, but even if you start with the paradigm value, at least at some level, you're going to have to figure out at least some of the other lower values of Donna Manella's 12 steps to system change in order to implement those changes. I mean, you still have to come up with how that is going to flow and how those paradigms are going to be organized. And so transitioning the 99% of conventional farms over to regenerative is an immense challenge. And one other thought that came to my mind, and when I'm doing these, all kinds of thoughts come to my mind. It seems to me that it would actually be easier for large corporate farms to do the transition to regenerative farming economically than it would be for a lot of small farming communities to do so. Am I wrong about that?
So I see two approaches here. One is the temptation of these corporate actors, of course, to maintain control and ownership over the markets, clearly.
Yeah.
The other one would be for them to go up in the production chain and decentralize their supply chain and act as support structures for the local, smaller, decentralized farmer to actually function, which is what the system you see in Europe.
Right.
And in most parts of the world, actually. So you have you can develop sophisticated tools, because today we have technology that is micro technology, miniaturized technology to assist farmers with high-tech irrigation systems, with creating their own fertilizer out of mulch, out of animal, products, and assist them with software that helps them to control their production cycle. They can use drones to fly over their fields to identify problem areas. Or to test the state of their crop. There is endless variety of technology available that is already miniaturized or can be further miniaturized to assist these farmers to produce an optimized crop for their particular area. The other thing is they need logistics support. So logistics, in a sense that corporations, large food systems need certain products in certain volumes. That means there is an aggregation capacity required. And as the system decentralizes, it becomes more difficult for a small farmer to know exactly what he should be growing. And that information needs to go out before the seed goes into the ground.
Right.
So the intelligence, the market intelligence required for farms to continue to supply a large market, a global market actually, with reliable supplies of needed products, that in turn requires intelligence to be provided there at a much different level than it is today. So today, the big multinational corporations do this on their own. They go and contract with farmers. I need 1,000 acres of carrots, and those 1,000 acres go to one central point from which they then get distributed across the country. And that is extremely efficient, cost efficient, but it is also extremely damaging to the environment. It's an unsustainable system.
Right.
Does that make sense? So there is.
It does, but it makes me think that there should be tremendous opportunity for disruptive innovation in this space.
Well, there is. There are so many amazing business opportunities here, where and so the hope should really be to point the path towards innovative disruptors.
Right.
Now, there are companies out there that have, I mean, Nori, for example, wanting to create a carbon market. That is a disruptive technology. So companies like this should be promoted. They should be funded. They should find access to capital and organizational support. Yeah, I mean, the time is absolutely ripe for this kind of disruptive innovation.
Because it seems to me that not only would that disruptive innovation help the rural communities, similarly to the way they would use cell phones in order to help fish markets in Italy and places like that, but that it would also start eating into the incumbent corporate conventional marketing, the large businesses, who would either have to start adopting that system or find themselves slowly being eaten away, because this should hopefully be able to generate better return and value over time, which is what has happened with every disruptive innovation pathway. So that's something, but that also means getting a little bit into the weeds about how all this flows. I mean, understanding how it is, because the other point you made, I think, is really interesting. A lot of what the farmer has to depend upon is stuff in the future. He has to know what to plant now because he has to have information about what's going to sell in the future. And sometimes that information isn't correct. If you can improve that information flow, not only for him, but for the whole community, that's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, and that function is typically the broker, the brokerage function.
Right.
Because the broker conveys market intelligence between the market and the producer. So the broker sits in the middle and learns what the market needs, what type of quality, I mean, from product to quality, price range, and things like that, and then conveys that back to the market, and the broker then also becomes the aggregator.
Right.
So the broker finds, I need 1,000 acres of carrots, and I have 30 farms, and I split up the order, and now 30 farmers have the information to produce a collective 1,000 acres of carrots, and the broker organizes the aggregation and delivery of the product.
Right. You provided an article on innovative brokers.
Innovations brokers, yeah.
So I'm taking a look at that now, and I kind of like, that's my next map for my own edification, and to give everybody else is going to be on that. All right. Other people, come on, guys, let's contribute.
I need some clarification here. I don't understand blockchain yet. Now, what I hear you saying is that blockchain could give, sets up a market dynamically without having to set up regulations, and the early adopters that would be the innovators also would respond to these clues fairly quickly and effectively from blockchain.
Right. So what blockchain does, the idea that Nori has, this company, Upstart, they are in the process of developing a methodology to measure carbon content in soil over time. and to measure the increase in carbon within the soil, translate that into on a per ton basis, and then provide the farmer with a coin, basically, which is based on blockchain, which the farmer then can redeem in the cryptocurrency market. So that the advantage of blockchain is that it creates an indelible record. That means the farmer cannot sell the same coin or cannot sell the same field again to someone else. Now, so it's a completely transparent process that assures the investor, you know, that this has indeed a value and it's indeed happening. So that I mean, blockchain changes the playing field because of its transparency and record keeping.
It also deals with a deeper paradigm aspect to this, and Klaus also provided this too. The work of Rachel Botsman, trust. It instills trust in the system with people who are not in the same community. It provides a way where people who have to deal with a network, which basically we're going to be setting up here, we're talking about setting up networks, that they can feel like they have trust in the system because of the information they're getting, and not only is it quality information, but it's all trustworthy information. So he provided a YouTube video, I provided her website, so there's a number of things that we can look at there. And I think that is very important, because my feeling is, and I agree with what Klaus is saying, is about the paradigm change, but a lot of this is going to have to be done at the community level. Because if you try doing it at a national level, it is so difficult working through partisan politics, or you try to change big businesses, is that if you can work with the communities, one, you keep them from dying, which is what they're doing because of the system we have now. And two, getting down to the people level type of thing, I think is where we can really see change being made. But that's, you know, I'm an ABCD advocate, so. All right, other guys, what do y'all think? Anything about the map you don't like, or you're thinking, hey, you know, this doesn't make any sense, or I think you got this wrong, or somebody didn't do this right? I mean, because, sorry, one of the worries I always have when I do maps, and I've done about 3 of these group projects, mostly with Acumen and the systems practice projects they have going on. And my worry is always that I create this really nice looking map, which is supposed to be telling a story, but in truth, it's telling the wrong story, or I've told the right story in the wrong way. But nobody is telling me this because, oh, it looks so great. It's got to be right. I mean, look, it's got all the circles. It's got to be right. We don't need to even, you know, and that's, it's like, how do I make sure that what I'm giving people is actually valid? Because I can get lost in the woods, and after a while, I just start thinking, this is the best thing ever. This is better than sliced bread.
Well, I must admit that I am a little bit behind here. I've lost some time because of other commitments, so I need a little bit more time to digest some of the concepts, some of the very interesting concepts that have been discussed.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of, you know, too many commitments at the same time.
Anybody else?
Hi.
Just an added thought here is when we speak about community level engagement, more of an empowerment to make this an effective undertaking. I believe I brought up one time when I think it's critical for us to see the different players here, the different members in the ecosystem.
Right.
And for the reason that if we are looking at a certain lever that we could pool, now we have a thorough understanding of the relationship of each member.
Right, right. Almost
And
like
the
a
power that
stakeholder
they
map.
have.
Almost like a stakeholder map.
That is correct, Brian. Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay. All right. That could be interesting.
Brian?
Yes,
Brian.
yes.
Uh,
Oh,
I also had a hard time to follow the last sessions, but it seems to me that we have like two systems. The system of small farmers and the system of, let's say, the big industries, no,
right.
in farming. So what we need first, for sure, we have to change, make a paradigm change, education, which is pinpointed in your in the maps, but we should also think how we can use the best of each of the systems. The system of, let's say, rural farming and the system of industries. And probably here is the key, because each, let's say, each system grew and has its power and weakness. And we have to probably search where we can have this kind of synergy. Let's say I work in a company who provides cold stores. I know how it's important a cold store, like, let's say, in a rural region, to have a cold store. How is important, let's say, the logistic for the small farmers. So probably we should try to not put the two systems one against the other, but to find the synergy. And for sure, we have to educate the people, and we have to educate also the big companies, because also they are making harm to the environment. And we have to educate also the small farmers, because also they need supports and technology and so on.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent
Got a
point.
new participant?
Me?
No, no, I don't see a name, but I just saw a new face show up.
Hi, this is Pat Merzen. I was just on no video option for a while.
Oh, okay. All right. Hi, Pat. Okay.
Hi.
Lost somebody. Okay. So what I'm putting on the screen right now is related to what Pachera was just talking about. It includes both our system we're looking at, which is this B1 and B2 over here. And the rest of this is the more standard conventional system. And it's based on this. I get it to show up, hopefully. This was created by Christopher Chase, and it's a rich picture map. Oh, I may not be able to do that. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. So this was his idea of what our farming system looks right now. And though it's kind of pretty pictures, if you look more in detail, he's talking about pollution and health problems and other things like that. So what I did was, I can get back there now. Created this map, but also what Romer was talking about. Again, I need to move out of the way and come up here. Was provider awareness. This is something that Romer and I had talked about. I'm not used to this moving everything around. There we go. and this is not complete yet, but this was some of the ideas of trying to find some cross collaboration between the farms. At least that's the sense I had. Of a provider awareness, both from the large providers and the small providers, and how that might go through the system. Did I get that right, Romer? Sorry, I'm probably messing with your head.
Yes, Brian. I think this is
okay.
nicely laid out. Yeah, from our conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So what I'm saying is we've got a lot. We're at different places with, you know, like I said, I'm retired and I get to play with this, and this is. I'm very interested in group modeling and democracy and community empowerment and how this can be used to help communities find solutions to the problems they're having. In this case, we're looking at rural communities. But it seems to me that we have different ideas about how to proceed, or different strengths, which all should be brought into this process. So I'm wondering how to, and I think Gene's back, right? Gene, you're back? Okay. You can unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm back.
Okay. You can take over again, too.
No, you're doing fine, I think.
Okay.
Everybody's still here?
Yeah, everybody's still here. Amazing. I know that personally, I've got this interest right now in this innovation brokerage that Klaus provided. I mean, I think that's an interesting idea, and I kind of like to flesh that out a bit more. But how do we proceed from here? Because I asked you, I think what we got right now with our map, we've got a few things. Well, okay. My brain is all over the place. All right. The latest thing I did is I created this one here. Gene had put in a new factor or element, climate change, which was not incorporated in the map. So I threw it over here, okay? And my argument, my story, right or wrong, is that climate change has a direct positive, not only good positive, I mean increasing positive effect on environmental concerns. When the climate change, and we're considering climate change always to be bad in this instance, environmental concerns are going to go up. I consider environmental concerns to have a dampening effect on ecological considerations, but I'm considering ecological considerations to be positive. It's those steps that we take to improve our farming or improve whatever we're doing out there, its impact on both the environment and society and everything else. And I consider ecological considerations to have a dampening effect on climate change, but only at a very weak point. So strongly changing environmental concerns, immediately changing ecological considerations, but only weakly improving climate change. So this is, let me finish and I'll go back to you, Klaus. This is a vicious reinforcing loop. Mitigated slightly with ecological considerations, but it's a mitigated reinforcing loop. Now, this may be wrong. I may have presented it wrong. I may have the wrong assumptions, but this is what I got so far. Klaus, what are you going to say?
Yeah, I wanted to come back to what Bichara was saying, because I thought that was an important comment that he expressed there. We should at least attempt to create a complementary relationship between large systems and the innovations and changes required. And there is an absolute need to do so, because you can't just wish the existing retail markets away,
right.
which are completely dominated by, I mean, you have Walmart and Costco and Kroger and Albertson controlling 80% of the US retail markets.
Right.
And so So they need to be on board and become players in this, and they need to see how they can survive and benefit from all of these changes. So that's I think we need to find a way of making this complementary. And the way I would describe this, look at Home Depot or Lowe's.
Right.
You know, Home Depot empowers local contractors with tools, with materials, with building supplies. So you can do anything you need to do in your local market, and you don't have to worry about where you order your nails from or where you can buy a drill. So the farmer basically needs a Home Depot kind of support structure,
right,
where they can get everything at wholesale prices and wholesale value.
Right.
Then coming back to what you are just putting on here, climate change. I see climate change at the paradigm level.
Right.
And it's actually, it should be at the very top, because that is the existential threat and challenge we're facing. I mean, the reason why I'm engaged in this whole thing is that, you know, we are running into a disaster here, and I'm just working on a seminar series for the Sierra Club, you know, where we go through 3 elements, and the number 1 element would be to explain how the current carbon budget has very little room left, and based on current emission standards, there are very few years left before we fly by crucial tipping points. I mean, a disastrous thing. So the idea that this can be captured by changing the energy systems in time to prevent, you know, a disaster, that's not going to happen. No, it's too late. We're done. So there has to be an offset, and that offset has to be sequestration. That means there have to be gigatons of carbon removed out of the atmosphere, and the only way to do that is to put them into the soil. And the only known technology that we have to do that is photosynthesis. So agriculture, regenerative organic agriculture, is a system that uses photosynthesis to sequester carbon into the soil. That is the overarching highest level in the paradigm that needs to drive the entire system. And then from there we come, okay, so how do we shift agriculture into regenerative organic?
Right.
And so then, so at the high paradigm system value, that's where we have an entry point. And that means then that all stands through the entire pyramid.
Right, right. So that's what we need to kind of like get a better handle. One of the things I'm reading about, forestry is also a means of capturing carbon, as long as you don't make it monocrop, you know, trees. I mean, you try to give diversity in it. And I saw someplace that according to EPA, agricultural provides about, or it contributes about 9% of the greenhouse gases. So if you were to change to the regenerative, one, you'd lower that 9% down, but I'd have to think you get actually a benefit. You get a surplus because you're taking the carbon out with the regenerative. So it's actually more bang for your buck type of thing. But you still have to go through the process of transitioning with keeping the economic welfare of the communities and the farmers in mind, which I don't think is going to be a straight line process. I think you have to be really careful about how you do that.
Yeah, the agriculture, the numbers are of course all over the place, but agriculture is more contributing roughly 25% to global emissions, because you have to also bake in transport, logistic systems, and the loss of carbon out of soil. And then methane. By the time you put methane into the equation, it goes really wild. So And the potential is, first of all, you can remove most of those 25% and go negative instead. So agriculture really is the key,
right,
for global survival, so to speak.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's not an exaggeration to say that.
right, okay, right. It also seems I'm seeing farming systems like greenhouses and other urban farming systems, which aren't going to put carbon back into the soil, but they're also not taking carbon out of the soil either.
Right.
Right. So if they can make up for what regenerative farming can't make as far as meeting the need, the food need, they may be able to supplement that in certain places. But, just a lot of ideas going through my head right now, guys, and I'm just wondering, is what the best way to proceed from here?
Okay, from a map that I showed you a while ago, it probably makes sense to take the existing map and identify where the leverage points are in that particular map. And then identify the relations that have to be changed. Either they have to be removed or new ones added to cause the structure to behave the way that you want it to.
Okay.
So it's an explicit remodeling so that the new set of relationships, in fact, drive the whole context to move in the direction that we really wanted to go in. Now, before I continue on that, Klaus, isn't the Home Depot equivalent for farmers Tractor Supply and Agway?
It's by no means as complete. I mean, I'm not familiar with it, but it goes beyond equipment. No,
Agway is equipment and supplies and just practically anything a farmer would ever want. So it was just a thought. And then I have a comment about the loop that we're looking at in terms of, I agree with, as climate change continues to get worse, it increases our environmental concerns. As environmental concerns increase, are ecological considerations likely to decrease?
Well, I'm considering ecological considerations to be a positive. And that it makes it more difficult to apply those ecological considerations. I mean, if you all of a sudden you're having flooding instead of just having heavy rains, you have to change. It makes local production, which is what this connects to down here. Oh no, local consumption. Yeah, let's think about that. Yeah, maybe this one. Yeah.
No, I'm having trouble with the environmental concerns and ecological considerations.
Yeah.
In other words, yes, I consider ecological considerations positive also. And if I become more environmentally concerned, I would think that I would also increase my ecological considerations.
Okay, I wasn't considering environmental concerns being that a person is concerned with the environment. I was considering environmental concerns being greater heat, greater temperature, of flooding, of no rain, droughts, and that type of thing.
Oh, okay. So
maybe a better word than environmental concerns, environmental problems,
effects,
impacts.
Yeah, effects sounds good.
I would call it imperatives. I would call it imperatives because the environment is really dictates that impacts our ability to grow food.
What was the word, Klaus?
I would call it imperatives.
Imperatives.
Please, for this loop that you have now on the screen,
Right.
climate change is increasing the environmental concern, and the environmental concern, ecological concern, considerations. So, but this loop should be balancing instead of reinforcing.
Oh, I don't think we're anywhere close to balancing climate change. I think it's just getting.
No. It has like a balancing effect, because if the climate change is in, let's say, increasing, the problem of climate increasing, the environmental and so and the ecological, and this will act to reduce, not to increase.
Okay, but you're nowhere close to that.
No, what you say, what you are saying, okay, it has a little effect or no effect, but we cannot probably consider it as reinforcing, but very, very slightly balancing.
Okay, so I'm considering the vicious reinforcing. It's getting constantly worse. Reinforcing sounds like a positive word, but it's not positive in this aspect. It is negative. This is a philosophical discussion, guys, so anybody can chime in here.
Well, I would like to raise a topic that I raised some telephone calls ago about the risk of losing sight of the limits of what we are talking about, right? We have spent some time now talking about climate change, which is obviously a super extra important thing, but we could create a completely new model that is about climate change, whereas originally we were talking about sustainable local food system, rural community food system, right? So I think that there is, when we go through these exercises, there is a limit. Sorry, there is a risk of losing sight of the limit of what we are talking about, right?
I agree with you, Franco. I think that climate change is a defining paradigm in this, but it's not where we're going to actually make the changes necessary for the system we're talking about.
Yes, I wanted to be 100% clear. I'm not saying that there is no relationship between the climate change, but we could spend the next 200 years talking about climate change, right? And we would forget that we're talking about that we intended to talk about rural community food system, right? So there is a risk, in my opinion, to divert from the core topic that we selected at the beginning.
If we could find positive inputs to go into ecological considerations, some of the different systems that Klaus was talking about before, about the new technology to help people with, maybe water conservation or something like that, that is something that would play throughout this entire system and strengthen it. And it would, one, strengthen the system we're focused on, which is the rural community system, but two, over time would also help with climate change as a positive consequence. So where are we now, guys? Gene?
Yeah, I have a question for the group.
Okay. Oh, Robert?
Yeah, Brian, you mentioned about the importance of taking up this endeavor into the ecological area. Now, if I may deviate a little bit, because the sustainability of this system also depends on the social economic area we're in. If we are trying to empower our smaller farmers, we are not just addressing the ecological issue, but we are also partly addressing the social economic side, which is like inequality.
Very true.
So I guess since we are looking at certain externalities here, inequality is a big portion of what we are trying to work on. Yeah.
Right.
Just a thought.
Also, just for myself, one of the big leverage points I think we could have with rural communities is the focus on community health and tie community health in with sustainable farmer, regenerative, and these ecological considerations, because I think there's a very strong tie-in, especially with the systems map you guys came up with, which I've been playing around with. But if you look at it, I'm going to change over to relevant factors again. And now this one here, you can pick up anything. Let's see, system right there. There's community health. All right. Pick that. Go there. And then that's community health. Oh, here it is. Right. So these are all the factors involved, or all the factors and all the loops involved with community health. Things got moved around a little bit. But then it relates to the whole system. The problem is it's very weak right now. And so if we could figure out ways of enhancing community health, I know it seems like it's off on the side, but I think if you take a look, follow through in the map, you see it's pretty well integrated, especially if we're talking about rural communities who need a lot of help in this area. So it's like Franco said, we can't just focus on one aspect of this. All this stuff is related together. So it's how do we make this all balanced together, which is something I'm struggling with right now. So, ideas.
I still have the same one I offered a few minutes ago.
Which is? Oh yeah, right, exactly. I'm sorry. I got tried. I got up. Okay, if we do that, if we think that the map we have right now is good enough as a basis for how the system currently works, and we're going to go over to what Gene's suggesting about looking at changing or adding in things like contributions to ecological considerations, or rethinking where the leverage points is. Do we want to establish one of these maps that everybody's going to be working on?
We should create another map called leverage points.
Okay.
I should go figure out how to add something to the legend and probably a tag or something so that when you identify the leverage points, you can find them on the map.
Right.
Readily without, and the leverage points are, they can be elements and they can be connections. They can be relationships that should exist that don't exist between elements that are already there, or they could be additional elements that are not there that need to be there along with the things that they're connected to.
Right, exactly. Okay. Okay. I'm
sorry, guys. I have to leave you. I have to deal with a little emergency. We'll talk to each other soon.
Okay. Thank you for being here, Franco.
Have a nice evening.
Okay.
Bye. Bye.
Okay. So Gene, you want to go?
So I will go ahead and create the new map and figure out how to make the changes to the environment, and I'll send out, I'll post a note in a new issue thread.
Okay.
So that everybody gets a copy.
Okay.
And explain what it was I did.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
Now, my other question at the moment is that when we end the session, when I end the session on my system and I tell it to stop recording, and I tell it that I want to end the session, Zoom spends some period of time converting the video from its own internal format to an MP4.
Okay.
And I don't know what it's going to do on your system. Because the video is not here. The video is on your system someplace.
Okay. it's probably going to do the same thing, but it's good you told me, so I will leave it and let it do its thing before I stop.
You can leave the meeting, but you can't quit Zoom.
Okay. All right. I will not quit Zoom then. All right.
And you should get a little dialogue that pops up that shows you the extent as it's doing the conversion.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I'm open for Thursday if you people are.
Yeah, sure. So this sounds good to me.
Okay. I'll send out a note.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you, Brian.
All right. Take care now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stopping recording.